Hey there, today I'm going to show you all of my favorite art supplies that I'm excited for in 2023. Since my channel has a big focus on gouache, I wanted to start with that right away and tell you about my favorite gouache brand. This is Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache. They sell an introductory set that I really recommend for beginners, and they also sell individual white tubes, which is very useful. I also use other brands of gouache, but since these are my favorites and I recommend getting the introductory set, I just want to focus on these for now. They work really well for different techniques. You can use them almost like watercolors, but they are very opaque, so you can get very even layers with them as well. Most of the colors are also light fast, and they do have a light fastness rating on them. So if you don't want your paintings to fade over time, you can look into that a little bit more. I really like the consistency of these paints, and I've been using them a lot and actually bought the introductory set twice, so I can very confidently recommend these. You can see here that I have a few palettes. The shell ones are handmade by my girlfriend, and the only issue that I have with the Winsor & Newton gouache is that the red tone kind of crumbles on the palette. Everything else dries and sticks to the palette. Only the red kind of crumbles and is a little bit hard to reactivate, so you always have to keep that in mind. And I usually just don't use that much of the primary red and only pour out mostly the amount that I need. So I use the red mostly straight out of the tube for that reason. This palette seems to be super popular. I've been using this one for years and people want to know where I got it from. And honestly, I bought it at a local store. It's just a decorative dish and I've never found it again. It's super useful as a palette, but I urge you to just use ceramic or porcelain or glass plates that you can find. Go into thrift stores and such and think a little bit outside of the box because a lot of things can be used as a palette. For acrylic gouache, I really love Turner acrylic gouache as well as Holbein acrylic gouache. Both of these can be quite pricey, especially if you get a huge palette like this. But honestly, the quality is so good that I feel like it's totally worth it. So if you want to treat yourself to some amazing paints, get either one of those, whatever you can get or access more easily, and you will not be disappointed by the quality of either one of these. Moving on to watercolors. I have to admit that I didn't use a lot of watercolors in 2022. So I only have these two small sets on my list for this year. You can see that this set is already very well loved, very well used. I might even use up some of the colors at one point, which is a pretty big achievement if you ask me. These are White Nights paints. And while I do recognize that these are not the preferred paints for a lot of professional artists, I personally really like those for my sketchbooks because they are very pigmented and very vibrant, and I just love that. I have a lot of fun with that, and it's just a small enough palette for me to be useful and not overwhelming. And I really love all of the colors in this set. I switched out the ochre color that was originally in here for a teal color because you can buy all of the colors from White Nights individually. So you could pick out your favorite colors and put them into a set, which is what I personally would recommend to do. And I also really love this palette, even though I don't use it nearly enough. This is from the brand Van Gogh, and those are basically all kinds of metallic, shimmering colors, and you can put them on top of your regular paints to make them glittery, or you can use them instead of the regular paints. They work really well on black paper, and every now and then I really love using those. The last kind of paint that I'm going to mention today is actually oil paints, which is something that I started to use at the end of last year and had never used before. So take this recommendation with a grain of salt because I don't really have a lot to compare these to. These are the first oil paints that I've ever used, and these are by the ZenArt brand, and they actually sent me these to try, and I got a tube of Schminke white because Jackson's couldn't ship white because there's a weird shipping regulation currently. So I got this from a local store, and I also got some thinner from the same store. And so far, I'm pretty happy. I will probably get a titanium white because I accidentally got a zinc white, and titanium white is more opaque. But I really enjoy painting with oils so far, so I'm really excited to do a little bit more this year with them. Acrylic markers are a medium that I don't use that often, but every now and then it makes its way into my projects. I really like Posca pens, even though sometimes they splatter in ways that I'm not happy with. For that reason, I like the Molotov markers a little bit more. These are a really good alternative to Posca pens, especially if you can't get Posca pens where you live, but they're about the same price range, and I think they're pretty comparable with each other. I also literally just started using these new acrylic markers from Staedtler. I've worked with this brand before and they have really good quality products. So quite a few things are going to make it into this video actually. And I just started using them, so I can't say that much about them yet. But so far, I really like those. So if you happen to find them in a store somewhere, I don't think it's a bad idea to get them. Now let's talk about watercolor pens. I really love the Caron brush markers, and I've worked with them quite a few times now and will hopefully continue to work with them for a while, because I'm so happy with these. They're super juicy, they blend really well, and I've created so many art pieces with them, and every single time I just have so much fun. These watercolor brush pens by Staedtler I also just started using, but I have to say that I have a lot of fun with these as well. If you want to get watercolor brush pens, I would just suggest looking up which ones ship more easily to you, which ones you can get more easily. It really depends on where you live. I also wanted to quickly mention the markers that you can get at IKEA, because I use them for more fun things, for bullet journaling, or just to color in stuff in my coloring books just for fun. I wouldn't say that these are professional art supplies in any way, but they're really fun to doodle around with and do small projects like that. My favorite fine liner pen has been this one lately. It's the Art Liner by Spectrum Noir in the size 0.8. I really like writing with it, and sometimes I also use it for outlines. Now here we have pencils and crayons. The watercolor pencils from Staedtler, I've used those many times. I even made a free course for them on their website using these, and I just still love them. I love all of these colors and they just blend beautifully. For regular pencils, I've always had a big love for the Faber-Castell Polychromos. They're just the right amount of soft, but also they come to a fine point. So when I do use regular color pencils, I go for these. These water-soluble crayons from Caran d'Ache are something that I use when I just want to play around, do a fun thing that's a little bit different from my usual art. So they're not necessarily a go-to supply for me, but when I want to do a fun project to kind of mix it up, then I tend to go for these. Now let's talk about sketchbooks. My current favorite is this one from Hahnemühle. It is a watercolor sketchbook and it has this very light gray tone to it. I really love the size, I love the format, I especially love the texture of the paper because it has very little texture. So it works really well with gouache. And I'm also enjoying the gray tint because you can use a little bit of white and it pops a little bit more. But it's not too dark of a gray, so your colors still look pretty vibrant. I'm also currently using this one, which is also from Hahnemühle. This paper, I would say, is slightly more suitable for watercolors than for gouache because it really seems to absorb a lot of the paint and a lot of the water that you use. But it does work with gouache as well, and I've been having a great time with it. I also just wanted to mention this one, which is from Moleskine. This is a Moleskine watercolor book. And I have filled, I believe, 5 of these in different formats and sizes. So for that reason, I really wanted to mention it. But I'm not currently filling one of these. I have a lot of other sketchbooks that I want to try and fill. So you will not see one of these in 2023 most likely. But I do really love these. So I would say it is a good option. It's not the most durable paper. It buckles a little bit under gouache and watercolors, but it doesn't bleed through or anything. And I really like the texture that it has. It's not too much, so it works quite well with gouache, and it works really well with watercolor pencils. Now let's talk about paper. I have quite a few different brands at this point. I've been really loving these smaller blocks because they're very useful for my mini courses and stuff like that. These are from Fluid, and I was actually sent these by Speedball. So I assume that those brands kind of belong together. And these are 300 GSM cold press watercolor paper. They have a little bit of a texture, but not too much. You can see a theme here. I really like it when there is a little bit of a texture so that the paint will stick to it, but it is not that noticeable. So you can also go over it with colored pencil if you want to do mixed media stuff, and it's just not too rough. And for gouache, I feel like that's the perfect in between. Same goes for this Hahnemühle paper. It's a little bit thinner with 250 GSM. I would say I prefer 300, but this is still really good. I really like the texture. I really like the size of this one. And so we'll definitely continue using that. Now this one is one of the biggest watercolor blocks that I have. I know that there's even bigger ones out there, but I just don't work in bigger scales usually. And so if I really want to do a piece with a lot of details and a lot of stuff going on, then I will go for this one. I have to say that I really love this paper. It feels like painting on butter. I don't know how else to describe it, but I just love this one so much. I have to look up if they have this in smaller sizes as well. And if they ever make a sketchbook with this paper, I'm gonna jump and I want it. I also have to mention Etchr's watercolor paper. I have used most of this block actually now. I really love the size of this block. It does have a little bit of a rougher texture compared to the other papers that I've mentioned. So I would say this is probably better for watercolors than for gouache. It's probably not the best paper if you want to do watercolor pencils or watercolor crayons, because you will see the white through the paper and it's going to be a little bit harder to get these kinds of paints to look smooth. But for watercolors, this is a really nice paper. It's also 300 GSM cold pressed like most of the papers. The agave one is actually 290, so almost 300 as well. And I also have this black watercolor paper that works really well with the metallic paints, and so far I really like it. I've also used it with gouache on top, and I think for every now and then this is really fun to just paint on black instead of white. When it comes to brushes, I have to admit, I don't have the best track record with them because my ADHD brain cannot take care of brushes properly. So they usually don't last as long as I would hope. And I've tried all different kinds of brands, but every few months I just go and try new brushes. This one is a Da Vinci Casaneo brush, so it is meant to be a watercolor brush, a faux fur one, and it is really amazing for watercolors. I don't use it that much for gouache though. The other brushes that I use are mostly synthetic round brushes. I need my brushes to come to a thin point to get a lot of details in. You can see I have Etchr, Staedtler, PanArt. I also use ZenArt and other brush brands. All of these work really well with gouache, and they work really well for a few months until I have used them obsessively and not cleaned them enough, and then I just replace them and use new ones. The last thing that I'm going to mention today is this. It's the Dorland's Wax Medium, and I just very recently got it and I'm excited to try it some more. This is basically a sealant for your gouache paintings because you can't really put any liquid seal on traditional gouache because it would smudge your paint. So this is the alternative, and I've started using it, and so far I really like it, so I'm excited to try it some more this year. If you want to see some more art supplies that I recommend and have loved using in the past, then check out this video next.